Right.
But the question, I'm totally unaware of anything, by the way, that I ever read that said that we know God speaks to Aaron. He spoke to Aaron right away. Says, "Go meet your brother in the desert," way back.
Right.
So, and we always have, later. Anyway, so my question was, we don't see anything that says God spoke to Aaron and said, "Do not do this." And I always thought, why not? God should have. Or because God told us all our other commandments in great detail, and we know that God said it. So I know this is, with 2 minutes to go, maybe my question, which stimulated me to stay up late and hear you about what really happened at Mount Sinai. I'm wide awake now, so I'm sticking around. But I just wanted to know if you know of anything, and if you do, I'd love you to be able to send it to me.
Okay. I am happy to look among my sources. I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I will absolutely look into that and think about, all I can say is that there are lots of times when we forgive our ancestors for breaking rules that they didn't yet know about. Right?
But God didn't forgive them. He's
right.
People got swallowed up into the earth. I mean, this was not a forgiving situation. I always felt that Aaron was the most fascinating guy in the Torah for the things that he seemed to have danced through the raindrops and never seems to be punished, not in the true sense, not like the other people did. So I'm Stephen Newstein. If you learn anything, please let me know.
I would be happy to. I'm not talking about the golden calf and Aaron per se. I'm taking a little bit different perspective on this.
That's quite all right. That's why I stole it the 2 minutes before you were scheduled to start, and you've got a minute to go. So I just thought I'd throw that in because I've been seeking the answer to this question recently, and have had no to my satisfaction answer, because I don't think there is one.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is either. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we know or don't know some of the things that happen in the Torah. So this might fit kind of in a larger sense in with what we'll be discussing in a moment as well.
All right, I'm going to mute myself, but thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Emily, I think we're working against each other there.
Totally. I was just muting everybody and then trying to unmute you, but you were doing the same thing. All right. Well, it is midnight. So I am Emily Richmond. I'm the Director of Development Operations at the Federation, and I am so pleased to welcome you here this evening. Thank you for joining us at midnight at this very late hour. Thank you to Rabbi Locketz for what I know will be a very interesting discussion, presentation. So I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm Rabbi Jessica Locketz. I'm one of the rabbis at Temple Emmanuel. A large part of my portfolio is working with the education programs, with the religious school students, with adult learning, and with all other sorts of things. But I use a lot of visuals when I teach, so I do have a slideshow for us to look at while I'm talking, but that means that I can't always see everybody raising their hand or trying to get my attention. So Emily's going to be on that duty. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask it. You can put it in the chat so she'll see it, or if you raise your hand, she'll hopefully see that too and call on you as well. One of the things that fascinates me about the story of Revelation that we read on Shavuot is how we have no real personal account of it, first person account, and yet we have lots of assumptions about what really happened there. And even the resources we have to understand what happened aren't that clear. We'll see in a moment how the Torah contradicts itself, how the commentaries cause further confusion, and how it's really unclear that anyone can claim that they know exactly what happened at Sinai. So I'm going to show you a couple things, so bear with me for just a second. Okay, so like I said, I like visuals, and you know, who knew that you could bake all these Sinai related things? So if you're so inclined, I kind of thought these 10 Commandment cupcakes were pretty cute, if anybody feels that they ever want to try baking those things. But that's just silly stuff to get us started. So if I asked you what the images came to your mind when you thought about Revelation, you might be thinking something like this, right? So Moses, guy with long beard, standing up, lots of light, the tablets kind of maybe coming down out of the sky at him. I don't know, depends on how you think he received them. Maybe you have an image of something like this. Moses, still the shepherd, holding his staff, holding the tablets, up on the heights, kind of looking out. Maybe the people are down beneath him. We can imagine that that's what's going on there. Maybe you think of Charlton Heston as Moses, and this is the picture that you have in your mind from years ago, from having seen the movie over and over again, that this is what happened when the 10 Commandments were given at Sinai. A lot of art has been dedicated to this experience as well, right? So this is not necessarily something I would think we would see. And it's interesting, right? Moses is down, not so far up above the people, holding the 10 Commandments, and they all look kind of like they're ready for battle, right? It's not quite the peaceful gathering that I imagine might have happened. So art has done lots of things with it. Beautiful paper cuts like this, where there are no people around, just Moses kind of interacting with the world, the natural world, holding the tablets up high. And of course, there have been lots of opportunity to mock the experience, right? So maybe you've seen these cartoons or these types of cartoons where, you know, Moses speaking to God, you sure you want to go the self-publishing route? Here, kind of like, wait, there they are behind your ear, that God's a magician, making the 10 Commandments magically appear. So all of this to me says, we don't really know what happened. And so we have the opportunity to be a detective, to explore a little bit more what Revelation might have looked like. So I'm going to show a short video clip. And what this video clip is, I have to make sure, all of a sudden I cannot find my controls. I might have to exit this for a moment. I think I do. There we go. What this video clip is it's from a show that I have watched with my children. I don't know if anyone else has watched this, called Brain Games. Has anyone heard of this show? It's a fascinating show. It's not for kids, but kids can appreciate it. It talks about the way that the mind works. This particular episode talks about being a first-person witness to a crime and how reliable your memory is on what you have seen. So this clip is at the end of the episode. So it will say, like, as you saw, even though you haven't seen it yet. But basically, I'm going to give you a little heads up here. The people are watching a card trick. Then there's a ruckus behind them and a crime occurs. And then we get to see how the detective starts to try to figure out who witnessed what and how they saw it. So Emily, I'm going to play this, and I'm going to give you, ask you to give me a thumbs up if you could see it. And
follow that pretty lady with all the money. You see, there it is.
Before we test your memory, we're going to let you see the crime one more time.
I don't understand you. What are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying. Hey!
Now, take a moment to think about what you just saw. What just happened? Stop us when we say something that's false. woman was yelling. A man ran from the scene. A woman was robbed. Did you say stop? You're right. That last statement wasn't true. But if you're not sure about the details, don't worry. You're not alone.
The most surprising thing I learned about memory is that you have to know that it is faulty. Almost everybody thinks they have the best memories, and it's not true.
Meet retired NYPD detective Greg Walsh. For over 25 years, he's had to rely on people's memories to solve crimes.
Memory starts to fade right away. That's why you have to get and interview your witnesses immediately. It's up to the detective to find out who is the best. Can you describe to me what you saw?
A woman just came out of nowhere yelling at this guy in Russian.
Spanish, definitely Eastern or Central European.
You have 20 witnesses. You're going to get 20 different stories.
They knew each other.
I don't think he knew her.
She was Asian,
Caucasian.
Mediterranean.
When you're interviewing a witness, take like a potato. A potato, that's the person's memory. But when you take that potato and you put it in the stew, and you're making stew and you're putting vegetables and all sorts of things, well, now the reliability is not as good.
Then this little kid zipped by, a little boy.
As you listen to these actual witnesses, see how your memory of the crime matches theirs.
He was mugging her.
There's going to be a thread of truth running through all the 20 witnesses, and you're going to concentrate on that thread.
Long black hair.
Long hair.
Black hair.
A good witness is someone who's measured in their thoughts, doesn't give an answer too quickly, is not too excited.
Seemed to start out with a woman and a gentleman arguing. A few seconds later, another gentleman came up and ran up behind him.
Now, in Andrew's case, he started to give a description, a panoramic view. Now you know you've got a good witness because that witness doesn't have tunnel vision. Can you remember what he looked like?
If I remember correctly, a red winter jacket.
Understand what you're saying?
It's kind of like,
A bad witness is someone who's too excitable, is going to give answers very quickly and may even embellish a little bit.
I just remember her outfit wasn't very New York. My memory is pretty good. I mean, I'm very healthy, so I take a lot of vitamins and all those sorts of like acai, I can't pronounce it properly, berry, that Brazilian nut.
Now you say that you think you remember better than anyone else. And
Because I was like right there, really, because I was in the back of the Monty game, whereas a lot of people are, I don't think they had to look through me to get to see it.
Nancy, she came up and says, I know what happened. She was excitable. I know I've got it right. That's a flag. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Now, back.
Okay, so we have that video. And I know the crime was at the beginning and it was very quickly, but I hope you noticed that it was interesting that everybody thought they remembered the details correctly, right? And even the things that you would think someone would get right, an ethnicity or a jacket color, or whether it was an adult male or a young child, all those things were very confused in people's minds. And it was something that had happened just a moment ago. So it strikes me that this is the way we can really think about Revelation and to make space for the different ways that we remember it as a Jewish people, because we don't remember the same things when we're looking at the same thing. So how do we know that we could possibly remember the same things when we saw something so many, many, many years and lifetimes ago? So I realize that comparing Sinai to a crime is not exactly what I'm trying to do, but the idea that we don't have a first-person witness account. We only have what the Torah tells us, and then what we can glean from pictures, from TV, from movies, from art, from other people's interpretations, which I think puts us in the position to say right away that no matter what happened at Sinai, yes, it's true, right? Because we argue a lot as a people as to what really happened there. So I'm not trying to convince you either way that something happened in a way that may not be comfortable, but I just want to put it out there that it gives us the opportunity to explore what happened from many different points of view. So I'm going to start by looking at the Torah itself. We find a lot of contradictions about the story, right? So Stephen, you brought up beforehand this idea that the narrative tells us that Aaron did this thing that is explicitly against the 10 Commandments, right? And that's a contradiction in what the text tells us. Here we have another one. In Exodus 8 and 9, in these two verses, we find that there is a sentence repeated, and it doesn't make sense that it's repeated twice or even that it appears the first time at all, right? Right before this, we are told that the people are going to accept, here actually, they say that they're going to accept everything that God has asked them to do, right? All the people answered as one, saying, all that the Eternal has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the people's words to God. So we have this image that the people already know what they're agreeing to, and they say, yeah, we'll do it. And the text doesn't tell us what they've said they're going to agree to do, only that they've agreed to do it. So it's kind of like citing on the dotted line before you've actually read the contract or the document that you're about to sign. So maybe that's a little strange. Maybe they're just eager to get this over with. But then if you look at what follows right after it, and God says to Moses, I will come to you in a thick cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak with you and so trust you ever after. We're told that this is God saying to Moses, I'm about to deliver to you these really important words that you're going to go then and give to the people to help them understand who I am and who you are. And Moses repeats the people's words to God. So it's like, why is Moses doing that a second time? Haven't they already agreed to it? So what is going on here, right? There's a contradiction in the text that it seems that the people have already agreed before God says anything to them. And then Moses says again that they've agreed or that they will do everything that God has asked them to do. And yet God hasn't asked them to do anything differently or anything in addition to what they've agreed to in the previous verse. So just a contradiction, right? If we look at, here's another one, right? So God is explaining to Moses and Aaron how to prepare the people for this encounter. So God says, you shall set bounds for the people around about, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. So God's basically saying, keep the people away, right? They are not going to be able to handle this encounter. They cannot touch anything that is close to me. Right? And again, down below, they're going to be stoned or shot. I mean, this is pretty serious here, right? Stay away, people. You are not allowed to go near to God. But then, so from the previous verses, we get the feeling that the people are going to want to get near to God. It's like predetermined crowd control. And yet here we read that the experience was so frightening to the people that they trembled and they didn't want to even get near, to the point that Moses had to then lead them out of the camp, kind of push them to where they were supposed to be at the foot of the mountain. Does this make sense? Anybody? Yeah, okay. Just asking for a little, yes, this makes sense. It's late. It's late for all of us, right? Okay, so God says, draw a boundary, keep the people away. That makes us think that people want to go. But then we have this, no, they're so scared that they're trembling and they don't want to go near the camp. And then we have this additional, they don't want to be anywhere near it. They're scared. They say to Moses, you speak to us, not God, because if God speaks to us, we're going to die. So just that they're so frightened, they don't want to go anywhere near to God. But then something happened to one of my slides. So there is another slide that somehow is not here, Or after all of this, God says to Moses, don't let the people near me, as if the people who are trembling so much have to be reminded to stay away from God. So another contradiction where the story does a little trick by repeating itself in ways that don't make sense. So here we have, and I've included some pictures, here we have this idea that, so the Torah repeats itself and contradicts itself. The Midrash contradicts itself too, right? So we've just been told that the people accept everything that God has been given them, and it sounds voluntary. It sounds like a mutual agreement that the people will accept what God has put forth for them. And yet here we find this text by Chafetz Chaim that says, they stood at the lower part beneath the mountain. And where we read it before that Moses is pushing them to be closer to God, here it says, this teaches that God, the Holy One, blessed be He, held the mountain over them like a barrel and said to them, if you accept the Torah, it will be well, but if not, there shall be your grave, right? So we have this idea of a mountain being held over the people, and the people being somewhat coerced into accepting this covenant from God. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like to believe that we were coerced into accepting this beautiful faith that we've been given, but it's a contradiction, right? The Torah has this awesome event. The people are so clearly moved, they're terrified, they're trembling, they're scared, they're encountering God, whether face to face or through Moses somehow. But here it comes across as God forced it upon us.
Question.
So, yeah.
So the first thing you showed us was about that the people told Moses that they would nishma, that they would do what God told them.
Yep.
And then it says Moses told God, but God doesn't need to be told. God already knows. God heard the people. God knows everything. Why? So not only is it said once, but you showed it was said twice. So what we have is, when you talk about revelation, is I think a lot of this is written to reinforce with the people who are reading what Moses wrote, or the 5 books of Moses, to make sure that they know, well, you said you would do it, and I told God, but it's really can't be the way it happened, because it's impossible to believe that God didn't already know what they were going to do, what they were going to accept. God knew everything, and He heard them, no matter what it was. So you have to consider, what is the audience and what is it trying to convey? The audience is, this is written for the people to hear what, so that they'll remember this as we have to do this for all these different specified reasons, not because that's what really happened. It's impossible.
Well, so we don't really know. And my point is simply that there are all these contradictions which can be read in many different ways. So who the audience is a really important question, but also, what is the perspective of the storyteller, right? What is the storyteller trying to tell us? So this midrash that is clearly different in its perspective about whether we willingly accepted or were coerced into accepting the covenant, this could be to help the reader, the perspective of the author here could be to help the reader understand the importance of what they've accepted, and that it was a matter of life and death, right? Our ancestors saw accepting God as being a way to live, because God would care for us and God would give us the laws to turn us into God's people. So I think the audience is key, and I think the perspective of the author or the perspective of the teacher in the way that the information is conveyed is extremely important. So I agree, one way that we could read this is that Moses kept repeating these words, as you suggested, so that we would understand, yes, we accepted that, we have to remember that, right? And that's a tactic that many of us use when we're teaching or parenting, or even trying to remind someone of the importance of whatever it is they're doing. We just keep repeating it, right? Maybe we repeat it a little differently so that we hope we can get the message across. Okay, so here's another, so if one of the contradictions is about willingness versus conception, or coercion, willingness versus coercion, I think that another one, another thing that we can look at is who actually heard. Was Moses the middleman, as it appears in the text as we read it, right? When the people say, I'm so scared, we're trembling, we can't stand God's voice, did Moses really step in and speak or hear for the people and then relay the words to Israel? First of all, this picture is just one that I thought was really cute. Popsicle sticks and little kids' art. So here we have this famous passage, famous in that it's one that I use a lot and I've heard a lot in helping us to understand that each of us hears God's voice differently, right? So from the biblical text, we get the idea that Moses conveys the message to the people. Here we have this idea from Moses spoke and God answered him with a voice. Here is how the voice reached Israel, each according to his capacity to hear. The elderly heard according to their capacity, the young man according to their capacity, the adolescents, the children, the infants, the women according to their capacity. Moses too heard according to his capacity, as it is written. Moses spoke and God answered him with a voice, meaning a voice that Moses could stand hearing. In other words, each heard according to his capacity to hear. So what this text tells us is that, you know, and maybe this is something that is for our benefit as well as what we just was just mentioned, that Moses didn't need to convey the message because everybody could hear it, whether they were listening or not. Right? So maybe some people chose not to hear, but the idea behind this text is God spoke to all the people in a way that they could hear and understand. And hear doesn't necessarily mean auditory, in a way that you could absorb, right? I always contend you don't necessarily have to hear to hear words of Torah. So this is another contradiction we find, that was Moses the only one who could convey the words? According to Tanhuma, which is a text from the 4th or 5th century, that no, Moses was not the only one who could understand and convey the text. So the last contradiction that I want to show you in the text comes to us actually from the retelling of the Ten Commandments story in the book of Deuteronomy. So many of us are familiar with the passage on the right, which we read on Yom Kippur morning from Nitzavim, that tells us that all of us were present when God created this covenant. And it's the same covenant that's been created with our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The covenant's created with all who are physically there and all who are not there. And we expand that to mean us as well. But then we have this text on the left that says, Moses called all of Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the decrees and the ordinances that I speak in your ears today, learn them and be careful to perform them. The eternal your God sealed a covenant with us at Mount Sinai. Not with our forefathers did God seal this covenant, but with us, we who are here, all of us alive today." So that limits who was part of the covenant. In fact, we could even say that that means that we weren't at Sinai, and I know that all of us consider ourselves to have been at Sinai, right? That all Jews living past, present were at Sinai. All of us experienced that Sinai moment. Yet here we have these two conflicting texts. One says, yes, we're all there. The other says, if you weren't standing there in that hot desert sun, watching this lightning show that God was putting on and listening to the words delivered by Moses, that covenant was not with you. So it's just a very different take on it, right? It shows how even within our tradition, before we even get to our own views of Revelation, there's a lot of contradiction, a lot of conflict, a lot of different ways that we could understand it. Anyone have any questions at this point? It's a lot of information. Everyone still with me? Yeah, okay, cool. All right.
No questions, but I'm finding it very enjoyable.
Oh, well, thank you. That makes it all worth it, staying up here to be with you. So I greatly appreciate everyone here joining me. So let me know if you have any questions as we go along. Okay, so what happened at Sinai? The big question everyone has on their mind. I think there are 4 possible scenarios. There are probably many more, but we don't have all night, really. So I'm going to give us 4. The first is a one-time event. The second is an ongoing event. The third is a community encounter. And the fourth is a non-event. Now, well, some of these can be described according to denominations within Judaism. There's only one that has made an actual statement. The Reform movement has made it a statement on number 2. So I've included that, but otherwise I want us to think about these not as being the view that is adopted by all Orthodox or all conservative or all Reform, but just views that are out there. And I think that each movement, each Jewish community has a mixture of these among the participants, a mixture of the beliefs in one of these among the participants. So so before we look at them, I think that the 2 issues that come up when we try to figure out what actually happened at Sinai, the issues of authority and chronology, right? So authority is about truth. Where does truth come from? Can it only come from God, or can it come from the community or from an individual? So where is truth? What is an acceptable source of truth? The second issue of chronology is, does God's ultimate revelation of truth, if you believe that, take place each and every day? Or was it really this one-time event with an authoritative message that was given so long ago and still resonates in its original form today? Right? So chronology is, when did this happen? And authority is, where does truth come from? Those are really the 2 issues when we try to figure out what happened on top of Mount Sinai. So if we think about this as a one-time event, right? We have from Tanhuma, that same text we've been looking at for a little bit. It does have different sections created by different people. So the writing is a little bit different. This section comes from Buber, from the section he worked on in Tanhuma. And he writes, when the Holy One, blessed be God, came to give Torah, he related it to Moshe, to Moses, in order. First Bible, then Mishnah, Agadah, and Talmud, even those future questions that a seasoned student would one day ask of his teacher. The Holy One, blessed be God, related even these things to Moses at that time, as we find in the Torah, and God spoke of all these things. Right? So the one-time event is that God is the authority on all things. God taught everything which the Jewish people needed to know at Mount Sinai. So even the questions that you are asking tonight were anticipated in God's world, and God delivered all that information to the Jewish people at Sinai. Now, it doesn't mean that suddenly we knew everything. It means that everything had already been revealed. So if you've ever heard that phrase, there's nothing new under the sun, it kind of relates to this, right? This idea. You don't really have a new question. You just have a question that may not have been asked yet. So it's kind of a different perspective, right? Everything has already been given to us. We have it all. And authority and chronology are kind of linked here, right? So God taught everything, and God's revelation at Sinai must have been all-encompassing, addressing all individual situations and particular needs for all times. So that even says that even the work we do to renegotiate or reevaluate or rewrite Jewish law and Jewish culture, even that too was already determined. So this is kind of the everything happened, everything came from God at Sinai. That's the one that's the easiest to explain and to understand, however it fits into your own belief system, because it's just everything happened there, everything came from God. Yeah, easy to explain. It gets a little more complicated when we talk about what it means if Sinai is not just a one-time event, right? What does it mean to be ongoing? And then where does the authority lie? So Sinai, this is when we think of Sinai as a reoccurring process. And I know that's not a real word, but it's not a typo, right? It's not recurring, it's a reoccurring process, not a fixed encounter. The Reform Movement's 1937 Columbus Platform suggests that the written Torah is a depository of biblical Israel's consciousness of God, a record of past revelation, but certainly not the last word in our ongoing dialogue with God. Instead, revelation is a continuous process confined to no one group and to no one age. So if we stop there for just a second, what happened on Sinai was only our first encounter with this dialogue with God. It was not our only one, and it was not our last. So it doesn't matter if we were there, if we were present for that original encounter, because we have our own encounters as we go throughout our lives and as history unfolds, right? So if the Torah is the place where we've collected all of these encounters with God of a certain time in a certain place, it makes sense that it's ongoing and it'll keep going. Now, this next part, indeed, God can change her mind, is something that was thrown into, and I didn't include the whole story here, of someone who questioned something that was written in the Torah. And when challenged, but is that what God intended? This individual responded, God can change her mind. Meaning that in a belief system that dialogue with God is ongoing and revelation occurs time and time again and new things are revealed, then certainly what God revealed early on at Sinai could be viewed differently. And one might even say that God could change her, his, their mind about the way things should be in our community. So as such, Sinai constantly is taking place. Sinai is an event. Again, with these, Sinai is constantly taking place, and it is the role of each individual to listen closely to what God is saying. In essence, Sinai takes place every time a Jew makes a serious and conscientious choice. Now, what that means is that Sinai can be a turning point when you take on a new ritual, when you decide something new, when you learn something new, and it takes it out of this authoritative moment and turns it into the possibility that through our decisions and through our autonomy, individual Jews and Jewish communities might share authority about Judaism with God, right? Because the conversation is ongoing. And it is a conversation. It's not just God giving lots of information, it's the people encountering it. They could have said, we will do, we will hear, and we will challenge, I think, is the way that we would look at this particular view of Revelation. The third one, excuse me, is a community encounter. And this is the one that has been written about a lot by some of our great philosophers who were trying to understand how Judaism could change for the times in a way that was true to what was originally revealed at Sinai. So, did God actually give the Torah letter by letter at Mount Sinai? Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his God in Search of Man, argues that the chronological details of Sinai are irrelevant, since the Torah is a moral, not a chronological text. God merely revealed God's self at Sinai. The people of Israel then recorded their response to God's presence in the form of Torah. This is what I think was mentioned when, are we the ones who are receiving the Torah and the message, and that it's there for us to read, not as the way it happened, but as the way we are to receive it, right? So God appears, we receive this recorded response that reminds us of this covenant we've made with God. But this goes further and says that while God might have initiated the revelation at Sinai, it was the human community which preserved that encounter, meaning the community becomes the true arbiter of God's law. What this means, in essence, and you can read the rest, but I'm going to summarize it, is that Sinai takes place in a meeting of community, in a place where people can come together, take God's law, and figure out a way to understand God through the community lens. This is not the individual, this is the community seeking to understand how God's law applies to them. So again, the chronology, Sinai is only the beginning. It's not the only place where revelation happens, but the authority is given to the community to shape God's law, to determine how it will be followed. And this, I think, is really the viewpoint that goes along with halakha, right? With the idea that Jewish law, official Jewish law, is kind of worked out and created and responded to in each generation and puts forth guidelines for the community to follow. Excuse me. The fourth one is a non-event, meaning Sinai, not that Sinai didn't happen, but Sinai as a moment of divine intervention and teaching isn't possible, right? So this comes mostly from Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who is known for starting the Reconstructionist movement, now called the Reconstructing Judaism movement. But this is not just their stance alone. Rabbi Kaplan rejected the notion of a supernatural God. He believed that God was present in the heavens, but that God really wasn't the process that made the world work, right? So if God is not part of the creativity, the integration, the love, the justice, all of that happens in the world, then there is no need for this divine event, this handing down of law from God to humanity. So he thought of it as merely a legend, meaning a good story to read of in the Bible to remind us that we have rules to follow and that they do come from a certain place, right? So, after all, if there's no personal God, then what was supposed to be revealed there? What was the big thing that people were supposed to be anticipating? So he identified the content of Torah as a set of folkways that the people of Israel constructed and continuously adapted to fit the spirit of their age. So I think this is interesting, where he says that tradition gets a voice, but not a veto, meaning that really nothing was forbidden if a generation decided that that was going to be their tradition, right? So there never could be a Sinai where a being of great authority passes something down, because that's just not the way he saw tradition as working within the community. He saw tradition as being whatever each generation needed to nourish its Jewish soul. And he anticipated that traditions would come and go, that they would be sacred to one generation and not to the next, and that would be the end of them. So it's a very different way of looking at it, right? For him, Sinai never happened, and authority is given to each generation to determine the rules. There's nothing divine about it. So that's quite, even beyond the opposite of the first one, where everything comes from God. Everything we do is passed from one generation to the next, but originates at Sinai, to this idea of nothing came from Sinai. Everything came from what each generation creates and chooses to pass down to the one that follows. So it's quite a spectrum of possibilities. The question is, what do we do with that? And I don't have an answer for that. I can tell you what I believe, but I think what's interesting is that in those four scenarios, there are lots of options for determining where we fit into the picture. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, or if anyone wants to share something they're thinking about. I purposely am not saying what exactly happened, because I don't know. I'm not a detective. I don't have the opportunity to go and interview everybody who was present at Sinai. And I think that each of us have developed our own way of thinking based on the traditions we follow, based on the teachers we've had, based on how we feel in connection to God and how we feel about God's presence in our lives. And what I think is amazing about our Jewish community is that we don't all have to believe the same thing. And we can accept that revelation is either a very important event or a non-event, but still part of our history and something we can grapple with each and every year. So any questions? Thank you, Emily, for posting that. I don't know. Did that give you food for thought? Something to think about? Yeah. Anyone have like a good reaction, an angry reaction? Anyone surprised?
Rabbi, I have a question. I want to thank you for your presentation. You talked about challenging a few minutes ago, in addition to doing and listening, and that brings to my mind the Hebrew word of Yisrael. So how is challenging the same or different from wrestling, in your view?
I'm not sure they are, and I appreciate you saying that. I should have thought of that, right? You just gave us the perfect example of why challenging is part of who we are, because we are meant to wrestle, right? And challenging doesn't mean to me like, it's not something bad, right? Challenging is when you want to know what's going on. You just want to shake things up a little bit and not necessarily be expected to do things just because. And I think that wrestling and Yisrael is bringing that same approach to God, right? We each have to form our own relationship to God. We can't just take on the relationship of our parents or of our friends or even of our rabbis. We have to figure out for ourselves. Now, I do see a question, or I saw one, what to make of that, that saying, you know, saw you at Sinai, or, hey, you look familiar, I knew you at Sinai, right? Anyone ever heard that or used that? You know, I think that there is some merit to that, right? Especially when we have Jews joining our community, Jews by choice, or even Jews who have been away and have come back, and even Jews of different denominations and different groups. It's nice to think that we have this shared experience, that even when we disagree and we can't come to terms on where we stand on issues, we have this place. We could say, yeah, we have Sinai. That's our place. We were all together there in some shape or form. And I think that's comforting. But I do think that if the implication is that we all experience the same thing, then that's where we have to be careful with that. It's one thing to talk about the camaraderie of the Jewish people. It's another to talk about uniform belief and expectations that we all witnessed the same thing while we were there.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
Mordechai Kaplan said that there was no revelation, there was no Sinai. Is that the accepted belief of the entire Reconstructionist movement?
You know, I can't speak to that. I am not part of that movement. And Mordechai Kaplan was the originator of that movement.
Right.
It too has changed and challenged and done all sorts of different things. So I would be hesitant to generalize and say that that is the stance of the movement. But I'm certain that there are many Jews, both part of that movement and not part of that movement, who question whether Revelation, the Sinai event, ever happened.
That sounds like a pretty radical thought to me, like a Jew accepting the Trinity or something.
Well, it's not about accepting a different God. It's just about redefining God's role in the way tradition is passed from one generation to the next.
That's something to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, it shows the wonderful breadth of belief we have within our community, and how we really, if we take the time to understand all that's possible in the way that we might have viewed this particular event that we share, it gives us a real understanding of all these different ways that we can connect, and it gives us a chance to ask each other questions about what we believe and don't believe.
Good point.
Are there any final questions for Rabbi Locketz before we say good evening to everybody and have a good night? Cindy? Nope. Anyone? So you take off mute.
I just want to say Chag Sameach and Yasher Koach.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach
Yes,
to
thank you.
everybody too.
Thank you. There's a lot to think about. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you all for being here this evening and joining us.
Go eat
Have a
some
great night.
cheesecake.
Yeah.
Maybe wait till tomorrow to eat some cheesecake. But yes, eat some cheesecake or later today.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Hi, Peggy.